Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily show about everything that matters, with the world's leading commentators and thinkers. Hello everybody, it is Sunday, January the 4th, 2026, the first Sunday in the new year. And to celebrate, we're adding a new weekly feature to our daily Keen On podcast show. For those of you with real lives who don't have the time to watch or listen to every daily show, we're putting together a kind of cheat sheet, some highlight clips from all the episodes of last week, just to give you an idea of what we've been talking about. And given what's transpired in Venezuela over the last 24 hours, I thought we would begin with a clip from a conversation I had last week with the Washington, D.C.-based international relations expert Charles Kupchan, who talked to me about Donald Trump as a demolition man.
But I think that Trump has so far been more a demolition man than an architect. He has brought down the world that America made, but he hasn't made much progress in putting something new in its place. And I have my doubts about whether that's going to happen, because this is a president who knows what he doesn't want, who has powerful instincts and impulses, but at least as far as I can tell, hasn't generated the strategic vision that's needed to build an America or a new international order.
The uniqueness, at least according to Charles Kupchan of American Foreign Policy, is its ability to seamlessly combine or integrate both realism and idealism when it comes to foreign policy.
I do think one of the most notable and unique aspects of the United States as a great power is that from the very beginning, from the founding era, we have been an idealist power navigating a realist world. We have never tolerated the idea that this is just another normal country playing by the rules of realpolitik. We wanted to change the world and make it a better place. And yeah, the United States has made lots and lots of mistakes. The United States has at times forsaken its own idealist values. But I think in some ways what Trump is doing is accepting that instead of the United States changing the world is changing America. And now we're just another normal realist power, making deals, making bargains, no real concern about the ethics of the country and the ethics of the executive branch. And that to me is a disappointment. And so
it's not an alternative, is it, between either being some sort of JFK style or FDR style idealistic bastion or Xi's China and Putin's Russia? There are other alternatives, aren't there?
Well, you know, I am someone who thinks that we as a nation need to continue to strive to find that sweet spot between idealism and realism. And I think it would be a pity if the country abandoned the effort to push the arc of history toward more justice and toward more freedom. Has the United States made mistakes? You bet. Is American history shot through with episodes of racism? You bet.
I didn't talk about racism. I'm simply talking about, we're not talking about domestic policy. We're talking about catastrophic wars overseas. I mean, 3 immediately come to mind in the last 50 years: Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So we're not talking about arcs of history or MLK. We're talking about America as a superpower, which has behaved like any other superpower in history, claiming to do right, but actually pursuing its own interests. For all Charles Kupchan's explicit and implicit critique of Trump's foreign policy, there is one area where he gives him some degree of credit, and that's Gaza.
we need fewer wars, right? I mean, the fact that Trump actually got a peace deal between Israel and Hamas, even though it's very uneasy and killing continues, that's a big deal. He deserves credit for that. Is he going to be able to take it to the next step and create a Gaza with a new governing council and get the Israelis to pull back and build on regional peace? Who knows? But of all the various peace deals that he's claimed to have achieved, the one that he deserves credit for is between Israel and Hamas, where so far full-scale war has not yet reignited.
Another of last week's guests who credit Donald Trump with a degree of success in Gaza is Jason Pack, the host of the excellent Disorder podcast.
Gaza is a qualified success. The 20 hostages were returned, and Palestinian babies are getting aid and not being blown up indiscriminately for the most part. So that one I'll give you. And the point is, as someone who hates Trump as much as me, it's giving a lot for me to say probably Harris would not have been able to.
But Pack is much less complimentary about what he considers the disordered nature of much of the rest of Donald Trump's foreign policy.
It's extremely disordered. And I'll situate this relative to the tariffs. You're right that the Chinese overvalued their currency. And you're right that they did unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. So Trump was courageous to call out what much of the liberal elite, Democrats and Republicans, were not willing to call out. But he didn't have an ordered solution. He raised tariffs, then he lowered them. He put tariffs on other countries rather than just China. Then he took those tariffs off. That's not order. He didn't have one peace plan for Ukraine that made any sense. Oh, we'll take away the intelligence sharing. Now we'll give it back. I'll have a summit in Alaska, but now I'll put pressure on Russia. I'll be angry at the Russians, but now I'm angry at Zelensky. There's been no peace plan. There's absolutely no coherent vision. Is it correct to get the Europeans to spend more money on defense? Absolutely. Is it correct to ask Europe to build anti-aircraft capabilities where they have relied on American ones previously? Absolutely. But go about that in an orderly way. Let the generals make policy. Don't do that from the White House, ping-ponging back and forth. And let the economists make our policy to recalibrate U.S. exports in the position of the dollar vis-a-vis the renminbi. Don't just do it with a megaphone and switch back and forth. That is disorder.
Oddly enough, though, as Jason Pack looks forward to 2026, the man he most fears isn't Donald Trump, it's Jeffrey Epstein. So what you expect then is this Epstein thing next year to blow up even more and for journalists to reveal that Epstein was somehow connected to the Mossad or other American politicians. Is that your big fear?
Correct. I mean, I think it is clear that Epstein was connected to the Mossad. We've known that for quite a few years. But the extent of those connections, and it wasn't that the Mossad was running Epstein. Epstein was far more powerful than just some Mossad agents or the CIA. He was himself an international spy organization or influence operation that connected assets in Russia, Africa, Israel, and the US. And the mainstream media has made this into a sex scandal. And if we continue to ignore it when the Epstein files are released, it's going to come back with a vengeance.
Alongside the resurrection of Jeffrey Epstein, there are many other fears, of course, for 2026. For Solly Özel, the Istanbul-based geostrategic thinker, his great fear is the increasing irrelevance and dispowerment of Europe.
Currently, the European Union is being attacked by China economically, by Russia geopolitically, and by the United States, both economically and geopolitically, in terms of America's withdrawal from its responsibilities in protecting Europe, which of course the Europeans are very guilty themselves for for constantly relying on the United States security umbrella. So my big hope for 2026 will be for the European Union to actually pull its act together. It may be a big if. I now also read many articles about how the European Union may not see, 4 years from now, may not be together 4 years from now, 6 years from now, whatever. I hope that doesn't happen because we do need the balancing potential and capacity of the European Union, which should also try to develop its relations with the so-called either global south or the middle powers in different continents, because that's the only way we can basically avoid clashes between the major powers, especially if the intention that people read into the national security strategy document is that the Trump administration prefers a world divided in zones of influence. That'll be very bad, in my judgment, for the world. And so Europe can actually play that middle powers in different continents.
The view from Istanbul, or at least from Özel, is that this new multipolar world might actually present some more opportunities for middle-ranked countries like Turkey.
Here, the sentiment is, and this is a sentiment that I think the government also wishes to present, is that as the unipolar world is over, we may be moving, or we are already in a multipolar world where mid-sized powers will have more room for maneuver. And given Turkey's geopolitical and even geoeconomic location, there are lots of opportunities for Turkey. This is how I think the public also views the developments, along with the fact that, of course, like the rest of the world, I suppose, there is some incomprehension about what the United States is doing, apprehension about what it might be doing, whether or not you can rely on its word and all of that. I must say that prior to the elections, I think starting with the Turkish government and also many Turks who are interested in such matters, they actually vied for Trump. They wanted Trump to win. And from the government's perspective, this may still be a good bet.
When Özel looks forward to 2026, though, he remains fearful both of the situation in Ukraine and the one in the broader Middle East.
I mean, Turkey is always very susceptible to the developments in the world. And as I said, it is really in between, it's sandwiched between two areas of belligerency, the Black Sea, Ukraine, Russia, and of course, Syria, Iraq. And we still don't know. I mean, if you want, one of the things that really scare me, and I think I'm not wrong in being scared, is that we might have a second round of an attack against Iran. Okay, and what kind of repercussions that will have in the region is something that I need to ponder. And whether
from
or not
Israel or from the United States,
I would expect that from Israel. I mean,
but for another Washington D.C. based international relations expert, James Goldgeier, the biggest fear isn't an American or Israeli bombing of Iran. It's the mismanagement of Vladimir Putin in the Ukrainian war. For Goldgeier, the Americans have simply misunderstood Vladimir Putin's intentions in Ukraine.
That's what he's wanted from the start. He wants a Ukraine that is not free and independent. And unfortunately, Donald Trump has an envoy, Steve Witkoff, who seems to be channeling all of Putin's goals. And Donald Trump himself is, admires Putin so much that it's not possible to get into a situation where we're increasing the costs on Putin for continuing the war, and so he doesn't have any incentive to stop it.
America, Goldgeier argues, faces a very simple choice. Either it acquiesces in Putin's destruction of Ukraine, or it pushes back aggressively. Those are the only two choices for Goldgeier.
Or do you want a world in which the Russians get to dominate and decide what goes on in those countries, and which is not my preferred world? And there is this difference in the way that security prior to 2025, there is this difference in the way security in that region has been defined by the West and by Russia. The West has argued that these countries are sovereign and independent. Russia should respect that, and that the West is not interested in harming Russia or, attacking Russia or bringing Russia down, but that it would like Russia to be a neighbor that respects the sovereignty and independence of these countries. And Russia is not interested in the sovereignty and independence of these countries. It wants to control them, and most notably in Ukraine. And those are two very different visions. And I don't think we should be just in the business of saying, well, the Russian vision is the one we should go with. I don't think that's something we should be agreeing with. And I certainly think it's incredibly dangerous for the people in the region who don't live in Russia and don't want to live under Russian control.
And then, of course, there's China, or what many people in Washington, D.C. think of as the China threat. Although one guest last week, Christopher Schroeder, the Washington, D.C.-based investor, venture capitalist, world traveler, who has just spent some time in China, actually disagrees and argues that China represents in some ways an opportunity for America to go toe-to-toe, in his words, with a country that is getting it more right than wrong.
The one observation every business person should make and every policy maker should is that they are toe-to-toe in many, many, if not most ways, and certainly ones that matter. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we want from that? You can't contain that. You can't keep that down, is my view. And by the way, people who are experts in China disagree with me on this. But my view is, as one very senior Singaporean said to me a couple of years ago, the best way to compete is to compete. And compete means deliver the goods, deliver on time, be fast, be reliable, be cheap. And this is about governance as well as in business. And there are certain areas right now where for us to say now is a day for us to go toe-to-toe with them, I think we actually literally have to step back and say, what are the things that are most important? What are the things uniquely qualified to do? What regulation to allow us to do it? What other regulation may require to take toe-to-toe? Real strategy about what it means to be a great country in the next 5 years.
But what Chris Schroeder witnessed, not just in China, but in Singapore and other countries in Asia, in 2025 in his travels, is a degree of personal accountability and responsibility, which he implies might be missing in the United States.
I will say that I am a Democrat, small d, like I believe very strongly in the rule of law and democracy as I was raised with in many ways. But there's no question that in places like China, even Singapore and other places in Asia, there's a tremendous emphasis put on did you deliver the goods or did you not? You have a plan, you put it out there, either you deliver it or you don't. And that level of accountability, the speed around accountability, the quality about the accountability, at the end of the day, I think gives a lot of people a sense that there's almost a contract between they and the government in that as long as my life is being delivered, the services and capabilities and safety and so on that they promise, things can be pretty good. I think the challenge of China is that their economy itself, perhaps in part because of the overemphasis on the engineering side, I've been told repeatedly there's 25% unemployment for people in their 20s. Everyone I know I spoke to was talking about real estate prices down 30%.
But for all the problems with China's over-engineered society, Schroeder remains bullish on China's capacity to manufacture its way to dominance in the 21st century. One thing he saw, which to me sounds quite remarkable, was the complete manufacture of an automobile in 20 seconds. Chris, say that again. You saw a car assembled in 20 seconds?
Yes, the whole car beginning to end was about 76 seconds, but literally the assembly of the car was the parts and the body would come up and the robotics would come above it. And you kind of watch it and count 20 seconds and the thing is fully assembled. Then it does final stuff on the other end of it and some stuff before it. And you look at that and it's a case example of huge questions that America and the West, frankly, Europe needs to think about from a competitiveness perspective. It raises all the questions about what does it mean when you eliminate these kinds of jobs in a place with China who values harmony. And there are a lot of trade-offs in life that I think Dan captures extremely well about what happens when everything is happening in an engineering text, but engineers sometimes are not empathetic. They don't necessarily have political understanding. They solve problems technically and not holistically. And that was completely what my experience was. I talked to dozens and dozens of people, cab drivers, car drivers, translators, parents, and you really had a sense of uneasiness that people at one level felt that they were very strong and can be very dynamic in a challenging time.
And what Chris Schroeder calls the easiness that he saw in China in his travels there last year can be contrasted with what he sees in the United States, where there's a very visible absence of easiness, particularly when it comes to the revengefulness that he sees, at least in the United States, towards people who are successful.
Which to me is a complete dodging of the harder questions, which is, why do we have the homelessness that we have in our cities when we spend $70,000 per homeless person every year administratively? Why are we having the crime problems in some of our greatest cities that we've had today? They're just, the harder questions are not, should you slap more taxes on billionaires? I am not sophisticated enough to tell you whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or how to think about that in a process. The idea that we should be demonizing people who have been some of the greatest builders in our country without in parallel saying, okay, what is it that we want to deliver on, frustrates me, because at the end of the day, you could tax every billionaire to zero and you're still not addressing the challenges which are so important for us to be competitive in the next 5 to 10 years. So to me, have a reasonable debate about how people are behaving or what they're doing, or if they're invading people's lives. Let's have that discussion wherever it may be, left or right. But to me, when people start doing this demagogic political stuff, left or right, they're actually really hiding from the harder questions. And the harder questions are one that are going to make a difference about whether, if we have kids graduating our schools who have 8th grade reading and math skills, that is what matters. And I don't care. There's nothing you can do to a single billionaire that's going to actually answer that in a concrete way. And that,
perhaps what Chris Schroeder is suggesting is that Americans shouldn't think of themselves as being exceptional in economic or political terms. And this idea is certainly reiterated by another guest on Keen on America this week, Julia Hobsbawm, an expert on the future of work, who suggests that the American model of work is not the only one which is redefining the world.
If you genuinely believe that some people deserve less because they are, fill in the blanks, less intelligent, or they believe in God less, that's a recipe for absolute disaster. So we have to pull back from that. The other thing is that, with the greatest of respect to America and the American way of work and all that California has offered the world, there is also a narrative, a story that California is becoming genuinely the epicenter of the future of work. Well, this is obviously nonsense. Why do people keep talking about that?
Doesn't matter where you are in the world, Hobsbawm suggests. Singapore, China, the United States, Germany. Everyone is going to be disrupted by the new architecture of the future of work, creating a gig economy, a global gig economy of insecurity.
The white collar world is becoming like shift workers de facto. It's becoming gig work, the job for life, the career path, the stable pension and benefits package is really disappearing. And countries are racing to catch up with tax policies and protection policies. Something like 50% of the American workforce will be freelance by 2030. And we're not talking restaurant shift workers. We're not talking factory shift workers. We're talking about everyone, everywhere, all at once being in the gig economy. And I think it's about time we talked about that, because that affects how you feel about work.
And when it comes to our future gig economy, as Julia Hobsbawm warns, no sector is going to be more dramatically affected than the university, particularly professional schools like law schools. You want to go to law school, it's going to cost you several $100,000. And if indeed the future of white-collar lawyers, for example, or all lawyers are white-collar, the future of lawyers is the gig economy, and they're the equivalent of Uber drivers or Lyft drivers in the 2020s and 2030s, then it doesn't make any sense to go to law school in economic terms. No one's going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars so that they can be paid by the hour.
I think that's absolutely right, Andrew. And I think part of the crisis of work is that both by its own hand and by the market of the professions, the education path for many would-be leaders and for people into the professions has been disrupted to the point that some feel it doesn't pay back and might even be worthless. So in education, which is being altered so fundamentally by AI, you've got a situation where reskilling has got to take place constantly. So the idea that you've done your qualification, you can work your head over a period of time and then life.
And the imminent crisis of the university is reiterated by Keen on America's resident technology expert, Keith Teare, who suggests that 2026 will be the year where we will see the first AI universities. This one, I think you're wrong on. Education systems are forced to adapt. They're not. They're just going to sit there. They don't change. This goes back to your previous slide on 2025. Institutions are outpaced by change. There's no institution which is more outpaced by change than educational ones, in my view. For better or worse, I'm not celebrating that. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just the reality.
Yeah. Look, I think we're going to see the first AI university launched next year, and we're going to see students enrolling in it. And I think that will produce the established educational system to try to compete. Probably fail, like all dinosaurs usually do fail, but they'll try. And I've seen it already in California, where they're passing rules now to allow AI in schools. I'd note that yesterday OpenAI announced that they'd sold bulk packages to 14 universities in the US for very large sums. So there is beginning to be an awareness that you have to integrate, not fight it.
So if we're going to see AI universities in 2026, what else should we expect in the new year? I asked Keith Teare whether indeed 2026 will turn out to be the real year where AI changes everything. Is this going to be the year where it actually becomes, where something happens, where everyone recognizes now that AI is the thing in it, to borrow another German term, philosophical term, the thing in itself?
I think we're going to see huge spending on infrastructure.
But we already have. I mean, that's a reality.
No, we've had huge commitments, but they haven't actually built much to the completion yet. So this year they will. I think the idea of data centers in space will become tangible and real. So it won't just be earthbound, it will be.
That's a bit abstract. I mean, in 2026, I would have thought that's more like
I'd be shocked if one or two players don't launch satellites that are data centers in the next 12 months. I think they will.
And also, what's the big deal about that?
Well, because the sun's capacity to produce electricity in space is many, many times greater than it is on Earth.
2026 won't just be a year of AI, Keith Teare predicts. It may also be the year in which we first see satellite data centers.
I'd be shocked if one or two players don't launch satellites that are data centers in the next 12 months. I think they will.
And also, what's the big deal about that?
Well, because the sun's capacity to produce electricity in space is many, many times greater than it is on Earth. And they basically believe they can get free power. That's a big deal.
Okay, well, that's very abstract. Let's talk about some of the more concrete things about your predictions for 2026. You talk about a mini layman moment for AI, which is interesting. Just a mini one. There may just be a layman moment. Is that the bursting of the bubble, Keith?
No, but it means that there's probably going to be a loser. It may be a debt holder who's holding, let's say, Oracle debt. It's hard to know where, but the ratio of debt to equity and revenue is getting heavier and heavier on the debt side. And at some point, somebody is going to have made a bad bet.
Well, they already have. Does it really matter, though? They deserve to lose all their money. And it's not just an economic crisis that Keith Teare worries about in 2026. He also fears the merging of economic nationalism and the race for AI domination.
The framing of AI as a race between nations will persist and maybe even get stronger, even though I don't believe that's the right framing. I think the America First mentality, which is becoming all pervasive even across the political spectrum, will probably get more intense.
So that's our summary of shows from last week. And let me end with a show in which a guest presenter, David Masciotra, the Chicago-based cultural critic, interviewed me, Andrew Keene, about my take on both 2025 and 2026. And we'll end with a couple of my fears for 2026. I'd say 2 or 3 things particularly worry me. Trump worries me. I don't think he's a fascist. I don't think he has successfully or will successfully to destroy democracy. But his willful cruelty particularly disturbs me. The fact that he gets such pleasure out of making people he doesn't like miserable. That's the first thing that worries me. The second thing is inequality. I think that America is increasingly, if not a feudal state, certainly a medieval one, in that the reality of the wealthy, the 5 or 10% of people who live on the coast, who live very well, who live in a globalized environment, and everyone else is increasingly disturbing.